everyone, welcome back. We're just going along through these lists of ways to be funny, different tactics you can take. We've gone through quite a few. If you're just joining us, great. If not, I hope the other tips have helped you guys out. Anyway, so the next tactic I'm going to talk about is, and I've touched on it a little bit, which is stating the obvious, okay? So this is the opposite of beating around the bush. It's stating the obvious. So, in The Office, the character Kevin, he sometimes works off of this humor. And like I mentioned before, Lemony Snicket states the obvious, right? And yet withholds from directly saying the less obvious. But he often states the obvious to be funny. Usually the character who uses this tactic comes off as a bit dim-witted, unless they're doing it intentionally to be stupid or funny or sarcastic, you know. But, however, characters who genuinely state the obvious are almost always funnier. I'd also say, I think Andy Dwyer in Parks and Recreation, played by Chris Pratt, I think he uses this humor too, his character does. I don't think this tactic needs a lot of explanation. But in order to use it to the best of its abilities, you state something so obvious that no normal person would ever think of stating it. So there's this one part in Parks and Recreation, Andy, I can't remember exactly what they're doing. I swear it's like a old Valentine's Day thing with April. April's his wife, if you haven't seen it. Anyway, they're following like this old scavenger hunt or something that was old of April's that she had done before she was married. And I'm sorry if I'm remembering this slightly wrong. But anyway, they find this thing where April had written that she had like a crush on Andy or that she liked Andy. And there was other stuff written in it too. And Andy's like, "Oh, you liked me?" Right? And the way that's delivered in that episode is funny because he's stating the obvious because they're married, right? And he's like, "You liked me?" And he's like, and April's like, "Well, yeah, we're married." And Andy starts laughing. He goes, "That's embarrassing that you liked me," or something like that. And I know I'm like slaughtering it, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm saying. So another example, there's this meme that I see go around sometimes, which is, I think it's funny. I don't know what show it comes from. It comes from an anime, but it's this picture of this anime guy. And again, if you want to look at it, the example, I'll put a link to this post in my description. Anyway, there's this anime guy, so I'm guessing it's just from this anime, and I don't know if this is just the way the subtitles were translated, but there's this line, and it says, "People die if they are killed." And, like, people think it's funny because it's just so obvious. People die when they are killed. Like, who wrote that line, right? So, usually with this one, you want to, like, to make it the funniest it can be, you state something, like, so obvious that people would not even think of stating it, right? And that's why it's funny. That's when it's the funniest. Okay, so then we're going to get into... So there's overcomplication and oversimplification is what I would call these. So you can create humor by having a character overcomplicate something. So one of my favorite, or one of the funniest, I think, well, I don't know, there's too many funny ones, I know. But one of the funny ongoing jokes in The Office is about the party planning committee. So it's a group of employees who are supposed to plan the birthday and holiday parties. So it sounds simple, right? Simple, normal thing to do. Buy some cake and punch and you're good. But throughout the show, there are all of these ridiculous things that happen in the party planning committee. Like there's these crazy rules and there's crazy drama and there's blackmail and like they make every task way more complicated than it needs to be. Well, eventually the boss gets tired of all the drama, blah blah blah, so he forms a new committee with people who turn out to be even worse at organizing office parties. And it's just hilarious. And I have a clip of that too also, if you would like to watch it. Of these, okay, so it's Dwight and Jim who then have to organize this party, and they are doing like a horrible job, and it's kind of hilarious how horrible they're doing. So you can play in the opposite direction too, right? By having a character take an overly simplistic approach to a complicated situation. And that's funny too. Actually, I had a commenter who left a good example of that. Let me scroll down here and get to it. I think it came from Indiana Jones. Alright, yeah, so this commenter said, I'd like to throw in the example of that scene from Indiana Jones, when Indy is suddenly confronted with a skilled swordsman who threatens him with showy and impressive moves, and then is defeated just by Indy shooting him. So that's an example of oversimplification of a problem for humor. Okay, then you can also play with miscommunication, which I think we've probably all seen to some extent. So humor can come from miscommunication, right? We see this happen a lot with, like, writers will play with dramatic irony when they're using this. So, like, I remember one scene in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix where Harry is trying to talk to Cho Chang about Quidditch or something like that, and Cho Chang thinks Harry is asking her out on a date. I'm sure we've all seen similar scenes like that where there's this miscommunication and it plays this part, like it plays into a different context for hilarious effect. There's a YouTuber, let me see if I can see what his name is, and again you can see this in the link. There's a YouTuber that English isn't his first language, and he does videos about, like, ridiculous things that people say in the English language, like spill the beans, and like how it doesn't make sense to him in this context. So it's like this miscommunication thing, and it's funny. So I also thought that, so there's a part in The Fault in Our Stars that's told by a character who's named Isaac, and Isaac has this rare kind of eye cancer, right? And he's retelling this story, and the miscommunication, I guess the misunderstanding in it, and it's so stupid that I thought it was funny. So this is him telling the story. So I went into clinic this morning, and I was telling my surgeon that I'd rather be deaf than blind, and he said, it doesn't work that way. And I was like, yeah, I realize it doesn't work that way. I'm just saying I'd rather be deaf than blind if I had a choice, which I realize I don't have. And he said, well, the good news is that you won't be deaf. And I was like, thank you for explaining that my eye cancer isn't going to make me deaf. I feel so fortunate that an intellectual giant like yourself would deign to operate on me. So just kind of this miscommunication, right? That this doctor wasn't appreciating what he was trying to say. Things like that. Okay. Then we're going into, and we're covering a lot in this video because these ones don't take as long to explain. So we're going into what I call defying expectations. So there's stories like The Tooth Fairy, right, with The Rock, or Mr. Mom, old movies, that are funny because they're defying our expectations. So most people picture the Tooth Fairy to be someone small and feminine. So when you have someone as strong and manly as The Rock for the Tooth Fairy, it's funny, right? In his Monster Hunter International books, Larry Carrera, that's how I hear people pronounce his name, but somebody told me that was wrong, so I apologize, Larry, if by some chance you're listening to this. He defied readers' expectations by making the mythical elves of his fantasy world, he made them into trailer trash, basically. And he brought that up in a writing conference, and people laughed just at the idea about it. So this tactic can work on a smaller scale, outside of characters even, and into, like, the plot and writing itself. So I found an article on writing humor that I did think was actually helpful. It's by a guy or a writer who goes by Film Critic Hulk, I believe, but it's a really great article about humor. But in it, Film Critic Hulk talks about how humor is really an exchange of emotions. You're taking the audience's emotion in one direction, and then suddenly you pop up and take them elsewhere. So in other words, you're defying expectations, right? And there's this Dumbledore quote that people liked, right? Dumbledore says in the first Harry Potter book, what happened between you and Quirrell is a complete secret, so naturally, the whole school knows. And people laughed at it because J.K. Rowling is taking us in one direction, right? One that involves a complete secret, and then takes us in the opposite direction, so naturally the whole school knows. You can also think of it as kind of like a setup and a punchline, right? So you're setting up these things, and then the punchline is something that defies that, or undercuts it, or takes us in a direction that we weren't expecting. And so those are some more humor tactics for you guys to consider. We covered a few different shorter ones today. And hopefully you can think about how maybe you'd want to use some of those in your writing to pull off get some more humor beats into your story that people love. You can get my latest writing tips at septembercfox.com. Please follow me, subscribe me, anything like that, and I'll see you next time. Bye!